Hello and welcome. In this episode, I'm going to share some creepy and terrifying Dogman encounters I found on the internet. These stories include a boy looking through his peephole to see something looking back, another boy who heard tapping at his window late one night, and a truck driver who got the shock of his life while parked on the side of the road. But first, we have a story where a man saw something strange in the parking lot outside his dorm one night. Also, if you'd like to help support the channel, click on the join button below. Alright, let's get into today's stories. The first story of this episode comes to us from Bulgaria, where the original poster, or OP, saw something terrifying outside his dorm one night. The OP is a veterinary student who lives in a dorm at his university, which is located outside of town on top of a hill. The OP lives on the 7th floor, where he has a view of huge wheat fields and a nearby forest. His first encounter with this creature took place 5 years ago when he was late getting home from university. He has 2 dogs, a German Shepherd and a Husky that was a puppy at the time. He doesn't mind taking his dogs out at night because he can let them run around without having their leashes on. He has them trained well and knew they would come when called. He also had collars for them that included lights on them so he would be able to see them at all times. So he took them out and they began running around and playing. But during their trip outside, his German Shepherd stopped and began growling at something in the wheat fields down the hill. The OP thought nothing of it as there were a lot of critters around along with bats and owls. He decided then to put the leashes on his dogs so he didn't have to run after them should they decide to chase something. His German Shepherd spent the next 30 minutes growling, so he decided to take him in for the night and bring his puppy back outside to play some more and get the energy out. When he reached his dorm, he expected his German Shepherd to go lay down in his cage where he slept, except he didn't. Instead, he stood at the window looking outside. His Husky puppy was whining, wanting to go back out, so he decided to try and make his German Shepherd go into his cage until he got back inside. He eventually did get the German Shepherd into the cage and looked out the window to catch sight of something in the parking lot below. There he saw a black figure circling the cars. The OP's first thought was that someone was trying to steal something, so he grabbed his flashlight and shined it down on the thief. Except it was not a thief. The OP says it was not even human. It looked up when the flashlight was shined on it, its eyes reflecting in the light. It was down on all fours when he shined his flashlight on it, but it quickly stood up on its hind legs. When it did, the OP noticed that the roof of the cars barely reached its midsection, and its head looked very similar to that of his German Shepherd. It growled at him then, something he later found out many of his neighbors heard, and his German Shepherd went crazy inside his cage. His Husky puppy began whining even louder than before, and it was then that the OP realized he did not want to go back outside, but he wanted to get as far away from the window as possible. The OP flinched when the creature growled and dropped his flashlight out the window. He tried to find this thing once again, but it was too dark without his light. But he did hear the crunching of snow as the creature walked away. The next morning, he went down to try and find his flashlight, but instead found huge dog-like footprints in the snow. There was also a foul smell lingering. After his encounter, he borrowed a pair of infrared binoculars from a friend of his who hunts. He began watching the creature in the forest and in the wheat fields below, crossing them and coming near his dorm while looking up. He and his roommate began taking turns watching this thing when his German Shepherd began growling at night. He stopped taking his dogs out at night and his puppy stopped playing altogether, instead remaining firmly pressed against his feet while outside. The OP has another post about his theories regarding his sightings of this creature, being that he has observed it for some time. The first thing he mentions is why he believes it could be drawn to his dorm. Being that they are a veterinary school, people drop off unwanted pets there. He, along with others who live in the dorm, leave food out for these strays, so they have a lot of dogs and cats around. The OP believes the creature he saw could be hunting these strays, being that some disappear. He does say, though, that it could be because they leave on their own accord or someone has taken them in. He thinks it could be targeting the cats because they usually wander around alone while the dogs have developed a pack. He also says it could be drawn to the food they leave out for the strays. When his German Shepherd sits by the window and growls, the OP watches the creature in the wheat fields. During the summer, he says there are birds and rodents there that attract foxes, so that could be a good food source. There are also goats in the fields and forests that nearby hunters let out to roam during the summer, providing another good food source for the creature. As far as the smell the creature left behind the OP's first time seeing it, he believes it is there to mask its scent, which is the case with all predators. This leads him to believe this creature is also intelligent, just like with other predators. Masking their scent is an instinctual trait rather than something that is learned, as predators kept in captivity also do the same thing given the chance, according to the OP. I agree that I think this creature is a Dogman. They are often described as being jet black and having heads that resemble German Shepherds, just like in this story. Not to mention him seeing giant dog prints in the snow, and the growling and leaving behind a scent. Growling occurs in just about every Dogman story I've heard, and I have come across a lot of stories where these creatures leave behind a scent. I agree with the OP's theories about this creature. It makes sense that it would be drawn to his dorm and/or campus due to the amount of strays in the area and the wildlife around in the summer, especially the goats. That would be a great source of food for this being. I also agree with the theory regarding the scent and it being a masking technique. But then again, there is usually a smell associated with these cryptids. I also think it's amazing he is able to observe this creature. How many people can say that? I'm sure being on the 7th floor gives him a sense of safety as well. I wouldn't want to be observing this thing from the 1st, 2nd, or even 3rd floor. Or even know it's out there living so close to the ground level. What do you think the OP saw that night? And what do you think about his theories regarding this creature? The next story comes from Ontario, Canada, where the original poster has something very bizarre happen late one night or early one morning when he was pulling an all-nighter. This story takes place in Trenton, Ontario. Trenton is located in central Ontario in the municipality of Quinte West, Ontario, Canada, and sits on Bay Quinte. It has a population of just over 16,000 people as of the 2001 census. The OP decided, as he did sometimes, to not go to bed before going to school the next day. Except on this night, he was getting a very weird vibe from his bedroom window, as he puts it. He says he isn't usually scared by his window, but on this particular evening, he just could not bring himself to look at it. He also says there was a haunting feeling coming from it, but he brushed it off and called his friend on Discord, an app used by gamers to chat while playing, and played some video games. The way he sits while playing video games puts the window directly behind him, and every so often he thought he heard a clicking noise coming from the window. It would be 2 clicks, then stop for about 10 minutes before he heard it again. His room is on the 2nd floor of his home, and there aren't any trees close enough to touch the window. Each time he heard the clicking sound, he would dismiss it as a squirrel or something, or maybe even water. But upon hearing it multiple times and listening to it a little more carefully, he was able to determine it wasn't either of these 2 things at all. Just before 4 a.m., his friend went to bed and the OP sat up watching TikTok on his phone. It was while he was doing this that he began to hear rapid tapping on the window. He says it was so, quote, mortifyingly human that he froze where he sat and just listened to the tapping as it continued. He then recognized that it was a 5-fingered tapping pattern. He sat there for about 15 more minutes, horrified, just listening to the tapping at his window, just looking straight ahead, not daring to look at the window. Finally, he allowed himself to breathe and calm down a bit before he got up and, without looking at the window, left his bedroom and went to another room where there were no windows to relax for a while. When he went back to his bedroom at almost 5 a.m., he lay down and heard a muffled howling and/or barking coming from the forest as soon as his head hit the pillow. He tried to dismiss this as the neighbor's dog, but it didn't sound anything like her. He does say it could have very well been wolves or coyotes, but they never come to that part of the forest, which is near a highway. He was very freaked out, but tried to continue on with his morning. He says that's where the activity stopped that day, but it definitely isn't the only thing that has happened in and around his home. He says he and his parents live in a really old house and they believe it's a ghost. They have heard things mock them, have had weird laser lights pointed around inside their home, heard whispering, have seen a black shadow over his crib when he was a baby, and heard an old British lady calling out names. He believes all of this happens, but thinks that what he heard tapping on his window that night is something else entirely, and it is lurking in the forest near his home. Another thing he points out is when they renovated his bedroom and changed the insulation, they found clothes from the 50s, old newspapers, and weird pagan signs spray painted in black under the drywall. There were also a bunch of words written in gibberish. It was enough that it haunts him knowing that stuff was there. He ends his post by asking if anyone can help him identify the strange occurrences and give him some advice on how to prevent them moving forward. He is afraid that whatever is lurking in the forest may want to harm him and his family. I know we don't get a physical description of whatever was tapping on the OP's window in this story, but I included it with other Dogman stories because they are known to not only tap on windows, but look in them as well. This is well documented in a lot of the encounters I have read about and heard. Not to mention he heard muffled howling and or barking in the distance after the tapping stopped. This could also point to this being a Dogman. This is all speculation, of course, because without a physical description of whatever was doing the tapping, it's impossible to say for sure what it was. As far as the other activity around his home, if he and his family didn't get rid of the pagan symbolism, as he calls it, then they definitely need to. I've heard stories where entities and spirits can be drawn to objects and symbols, using them as gateway or portals to enter someone's home and terrorize them. Once the people in these stories get rid of these things and symbols, the activity usually ceases. But as far as what was tapping on his window, it very well could have been a Dogman, but I can't say for sure. As far as any advice I'd give the OP, he already did it in this story. He ignored the attempts of whatever this thing was to draw his attention and didn't give it the time of day. Usually, if these beings can't get a reaction out of you, they eventually move on. This isn't to say it won't try tapping on his window again, but if he ignores it, then it should lose interest. I'd also probably stay out of the forest, especially at night. What do you think it was, Dogman or something else? And the next time you hear tapping on one of your windows, will you look outside to see what it is? The next story comes from Germany and is a quick story from a boy who has something straight out of a horror movie happen to him while home alone. This story is very short but has some key specifics about it that definitely makes me think this could be a Dogman. He says he lives near Boppert in Germany and that he was 14 years old at the time. He admits at the beginning of his post that what happened is quite hard to talk about. He was home alone while his parents were at work and was tasked with taking out the trash. But as he was about to do so, he began hearing knocking on the front door. He describes it as sounding like knives hitting the wood. He went to the door and looked through the peephole to see an eye looking back at him. The eye looked like that of a dog but was bigger than a normal dog's eye and appeared to be glowing. He later says in a comment that the eyes were definitely canine, glowing orange, and bigger than the peephole. He also says he has 2 dogs so he can easily recognize what a dog's eye looks like, and he has hunted before, so he also knows what a bear's eye would look like as well. He also does not think a bear would look through a peephole. Seeing the huge eye looking in at him, he wanted to scream, but he was frozen. He says he has never felt that kind of terror he felt in that moment. When he was able to move again, he backed away from the door only to start hearing rattling as whatever was outside seemingly began pressing against the door. This was accompanied by a deep growl. The rattling and growling continued for about 2 minutes before everything fell silent. Then the OP heard heavy footsteps walking away from his house. He ends his post by saying he is afraid this creature will return and asking what he should do. I'd give this OP the same advice I gave the person in the last story, to ignore this creature if it does come back and not give it the time of day. If it really wanted to get inside his home, I don't think a wooden door, no matter how thick or sturdy it is, would stop it given how powerful these beings are said to be. If they don't garner a reaction out of people, they normally lose interest and move on. It also could have just been a freak coincidence that it showed up at his home, but then again, I don't believe in coincidence. I've heard of people getting sage and putting it around their property or getting a priest to bless their home and property. If it were me, I would do the latter. But given that this is his only post about the creature, it doesn't seem to have returned. Hopefully it stays that way. Something else I wanted to mention about this story is how he describes the eyes of this creature as glowing. This happens a lot in Dogman stories, and they are either described as being red, yellow, or orange. I wonder if their eyes are just so vivid it looks like they are glowing, or if they are actually glowing. I'd be more than happy to leave it at me just wondering rather than finding out for myself though. One last thing I will mention here is that he says he has never been that terrified in his life, and that is something else that comes up a lot in cryptid stories. What do you think about this story? What would you do if you looked through your peephole to see a giant dog's eye looking back? If you have been listening to my channel for a while, it will not surprise you in the least where the last story of this episode comes from. I mean, could I really do a Dogman episode without a story from Michigan? This story comes from someone retelling their uncle's story that took place near Reed City, Michigan. The OP's uncle has always been, as described by the OP, a super serious and no BS kind of person. He says his uncle sounded genuinely upset when recounting the events of his encounter. The OP's uncle, who is a long-haul truck driver, was stopped on the side of the highway near an area that was heavily wooded in the middle of nowhere. The OP's uncle was out of his truck fixing something that needed to be fixed before he could get back on the road. The OP also points out that he was not hauling a trailer that night. When he finished fixing what he was working on, he went to get back in his truck when he saw a deer come running out of the woods, looking as if it was being chased by something. The uncle got back in his truck and was getting ready to pull away when he saw something looking at him from the passenger side window. The creature had jet black fur and bright yellow eyes. It was snarling at him with what he described as vicious looking teeth. This thing was so close to his uncle that he could see its fur blowing in the slight breeze coming through the cab and out the open passenger side window. The same window this thing was looking in. However, the creature didn't seem to notice that the window was open as it raised its paw to seemingly press it against the window. But then this thing recoiled and pulled back almost as if in shock that its paw had gone inside the cab of the truck. The OP's uncle usually carried a gun on him when driving, and on this particular trip had a heavy revolver with him. He drew the weapon, aimed it at the creature, and fired, hitting this being in the face. He got his truck moving and eventually reached a speed that he was sure this creature was not following him. He doesn't know if this shot was fatal and did not stick around to find out. The OP's uncle told him he still gets disturbed when thinking about what happened that night. He only saw the creature for a few seconds but told his nephew it gave off an aura of pure evil and ill intent. He still has nightmares about that night and refused to tell anyone what happened until years after the event. He was afraid people would think he had lost his mind. The OP says one reason he believes his uncle's tale is because his uncle has never been interested in the occult, supernatural, paranormal, cryptids, or anything similar. He had no clue what to make of the creature he saw that night, so the OP told him about Dogman. When his uncle searched online and saw depictions of Dogman, he said they matched perfectly what he saw that night. When I read this story and I got to the part about the OP's uncle looking up to see the Dogman looking in the passenger side window, I myself shuddered. So I can't imagine how terrifying it must have been for him to see the head of a giant dog standing on its hind legs looking into the cab of his truck. Not to mention raising its huge paw and it coming inside the vehicle. It's a good thing he had his revolver with him. From everything I've read and heard, bullets don't do a lot of damage to these creatures. But I'm sure a short-range shot to the face like that didn't exactly tickle. I'm just glad he was able to get out of there unscathed and this thing didn't chase him. Another thing I want to mention about this one is how the uncle describes the creature giving off an aura of pure evil and ill intent. This isn't exclusive to Dogman, but I have heard it in a number of stories. That's not to say that all cryptids have ill intent and are pure evil. I have my theories on that, especially involving Sasquatch, but it does come up in a lot of these stories. What do you think about this one? Would you have the wherewithal to think to draw your gun and fire it at this creature? And that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you'd like to hear more stories like these and other types of cryptids, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you want to send me your story, I'd love to read it. My email is wolfwhocriedcryptid@gmail.com. I will also put it in the description below. With your permission, I may want to use it in an episode. Even if you'd prefer that I didn't share your story on my channel and just want someone to listen, email me. We can privately talk about your encounter. And please remember to keep it civil in the comments section. No one deserves to be ridiculed whether they believe or not. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you at the next episode.